Another significant factor is the 3270 keyboard. Since we are using a Telnet 3270 client on the PC to connect to TSO, our keyboard will be mapped as a 3270 terminal, which means that we have some keys that are not present on a PC keyboard, as well as some keys that are on a PC keyboard that will not be represented as a 3270. As an example, the 3270 does not have a control key. You will notice on the 3270 keyboard that we have 24 function keys across the top. Now, most PC keyboards will have function keys 1 through 12, and we can use 13 through 24 by using the shift key in conjunction with those function keys. But those function keys are going to be what we can use in order to set various ISPF commands so that we don't have to type them on the command line, but rather we can just use the function key to execute them. The default settings and the standards that are in force with ISPF are that the PF1 is used to invoke the help facility. PF2 is used for split screen. PF3 is the end, or something that allows us to terminate a particular display. PF5 is a find or a repeat find. PF6 is a change or a repeat change. And then 7 and 8 are for scrolling forward and backward. PF9 is for switching between split screens, and 10 and 11 are for scrolling right and left. These are considered to be standard usage, and so it is not advised that they be changed. There are some PF keys that do not have any fixed values. You can see the PF4 and PF12, for example, and so these will tend to vary between individual users. In addition, PF13 through 24 are set as mirror images of these particular values. So as a result, they represent a full range of PF keys that we can use then to set alternative commands if we desire. So the idea then is that these standard settings represent what we would normally see in many applications usages. So for example, PF1 as the help facility is almost universally employed, not just by ISPF, but virtually every product that uses any kind of an interface where PF1 then becomes the help key. So as a result, that has become sort of the de facto standard in usage. Additional commands that we can invoke in ISPF involve something like the cursor, which allows us then to move the cursor to our first primary input line. The retrieve, which allows us to retrieve the last commands and basically scroll through, going through the history of commands that we have entered. The conditional retrieve, in this case, will operate as either a retrieve or the cursor, depending on where our cursor happens to be when we hit that PF key. The cancel allows us to exit an edit screen without saving any of the data. Return allows us to go back to our home screen. And split new and swap list are intended for splits of screens that make up more than two options. So in other words, if I split the screen 3, 4, 5, 6 times, then I would use that command in order to maintain the multiple ISPF sessions that I would have active. The function key from the settings panel is used here to establish the basic definitions of what these PF key values are. In not all cases will these PF keys have functionality. For example, if there's nothing to scroll down to, then PF7 and 8 will be inactive. So even though they're defined, they will not provide any particular function. In addition, you can see that we can label the various PF keys so that we can make sure that when we display them, we have a name or something that we can see that we can use then in order to determine what that particular function key is. The PF show command itself, as you can see along the bottom here now, basically provides us the information that we need in order to be able to determine what those definitions are. So this is intended for new users that may not be familiar with the PF key settings, or as a reminder in the event that you set other values so that you remember what those particular settings are. We can set the display to show, or we can turn the display off. Either way, the intent is to just basically provide a mechanism so that the information is available if we desire it. Key lists represent another way of assigning PF keys. And for the most part, we won't need to be dealing with key lists because they represent a customized value that is associated with a particular application. So as a result, if you were developing your own ISPF applications or a vendor product, they may have PF keys associated with them that are unique to that particular product or application. But that would be the criteria for establishing a key list. So for the most part, we would not be modifying any key definitions in that regard. Instead, if we needed to modify a PF key, we would just modify the PF key directly rather than creating a key list that would be associated with a particular application. We can turn key lists on or off. If they are turned on, then we would use any designated key list for that application. If they are off, then we would use the default settings for the PF keys in that session. Similarly, we have a keys command that allows us to set PF keys. We have the PF show command, which allows us to turn that function on or off or tailor the display. And we have the F key A on, off, or short display, which performs the same function of displaying PF keys. The keys themselves can be defined by entering ISPF commands directly or through the drop-down menus from the action bar. In the PF key definitions, we can use the keys command or we can use the action bar drop-down. Similarly with key list, we can use the key list command or the action bar drop-down. And then we also have a Z keys command that we can use for our global PF key definitions. Again, all of these provide alternative ways of being able to either tailor our display, assign a particular key list to an application, or to define specific PF key definitions. Here's an example of the PF show tailor function. So you can see that we can indicate the number of keys that we have available here is 24. The number of keys per line in a display, in this case we're showing 6. The primary range, in other words, what do we consider to be the primary values for PF keys? And then, of course, our display, we can determine whether we want to show only the primary, the alternate, or all of them. Now, the more PF keys we display, then, of course, the fewer lines we have available for display data. So that does become a consideration when we are looking at some output because the PF keys, depending on the number of lines that we have, will take away from available data at the bottom of the screen. In this case here, you can see the key list utility, where what we've done is that we're defining the particular PF key settings. You can see the key list name that's associated with this particular panel. As we said, this is going to be by default assigned to ISPF. If we had our own application or if this were a vendor product, then this would be associated with whatever panels they had written or provided. And as a result, they could include their own key lists that would assign specific PF key values for that particular application.